Hi guys and welcome to Crazy Pepper Revenge. This channel is all about crazy true stories, stuff that happens in real life when things get a little bit messy.
I'll never forget the moment my ex-wife threw my business cards in the trash at Thanksgiving dinner. Her laugh cut through the room like it was designed to humiliate. She picked up the stack of matte black cards I'd just placed on the table and twirled them between her fingers like they were novelty coasters from a dollar store. "Did you seriously print these yourself at some copy shop?" she said, not even bothering to look at me. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she dumped the entire stack into the kitchen garbage can. "Nobody cares about these," she added. The rustle of the garbage bag felt way louder than it should have in that moment. Her cousin Marcus literally snorted Chardonnay through his nose from laughing so hard. Even her mother, who usually acts like the queen of their country club set, let out this barely muted chuckle and said, "Well, dear, it's the thought that counts." I didn't move a muscle. Just kept cutting my slice of turkey, passed the cranberry sauce around, and wore the same tight-lipped smile I'd perfected over a decade of being treated like a piece of well-dressed lint on their expensive Persian rug. "What kind of title even is this?" her brother muttered from the side table. He'd managed to snag one of the cards before she threw them all away and was reading it with this confused smirk on his face. "Executive partner? Sounds like something from a pyramid scheme, honestly." Another cousin added, "I think it means he owns like one vending machine or something." That triggered another round of laughter from everyone at the table. I didn't react to any of it. I never did. My job at these dinners had never been to perform or defend myself. What they didn't understand is that silence is actually a weapon when you know how to use it. The longer you let people talk and mock and reveal who they really are, the more information you gather. So I just waited and observed. Then Uncle Robert stepped in. Robert was her dad's older brother, pushing 70 with failing eyes and shaky hands. Not exactly the guy you'd expect to change the entire temperature of a room. He'd been quiet most of the evening, just nursing a glass of red wine and watching the whole circus unfold, with the tired resignation of someone who'd survived 3 divorces and 2 hostile board takeovers. While everyone was still joking and laughing at my expense, he wandered into the kitchen area. I watched as he knelt down by the trash can and fished one of my cards out of the garbage like he was recovering some kind of lost artifact. He adjusted his reading glasses, squinted at the text, and then he completely froze in place. The card started trembling in his hand. Then, the wine glass in his other hand slipped from his grip and crashed onto the tile floor. The stem snapped clean off. Everyone at the table turned to look. Forks paused midair. Even the family dog stopped chewing on the dinner roll he'd stolen from someone's plate. "This title," Robert said, his voice brittle and confused, "is this actually real?" Nobody answered him. The room had gone completely silent. He looked directly at me, suddenly stone sober despite the wine he'd been drinking. "You're an executive partner of Titan Equity?" I just nodded once, staying calm and completely unbothered by the shift in energy. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. "Wait, hold on. What's Titan?" she asked, genuinely confused. Robert cut her off before anyone else could respond. "You don't know?" His eyes darted back to the business card like he was reading it for the 3rd time to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Her father David spoke up from across the room, clearly irritated. "Robert, don't start with this. She threw it away because it's nothing." But Robert completely ignored him. He was still staring at that card like it was a live detonator. Titan just closed the federal warehousing bid, the one every single East Coast logistics firm was fighting over for months. You know who lost it? His voice got louder. "We did. Our company lost it." He pointed at me with a shaking hand. "And you're telling me he is the guy behind it?" Nobody laughed anymore. The silence was so thick you could cut it. I reached calmly for the gravy boat and said, "I told you it was a good quarter." Sarah just blinked at me, her mouth slightly open, processing. One of the younger cousins finally broke the tension and asked, "Wait, what even is federal warehousing?" The aunt sitting beside him leaned over and whispered something about military supply contracts and logistics. Her voice was shaking a little. I took another bite of turkey. Honestly, it was kind of dry and forgettable. Not terrible, but nothing special. What wasn't forgettable, though, was watching the exact moment when her family's arrogance cracked wide open like that wine glass hitting tile. You could literally hear it, feel it in the air. That sudden shift from mocking derision to complete uncertainty and confusion. That's when I knew for certain I wouldn't have to say another single word for the rest of the night. The silence would do all the work for me. Robert caught up with me later on the back patio. Everyone else was still inside, probably debating cranberry sauce brands like it was some critical policy decision. The cold November air had a real bite to it, but his voice came out in this whisper so sharp it could have cut through steel. "I thought Titan was a ghost firm," he said, breathing hard. "Just rumors floating around. Quiet bids that nobody could track. No public board of directors, no press releases, nothing." He looked down at the card in his hand again, like he still couldn't believe what was printed on it. "You're the lead partner? The actual lead?" I didn't bother with any theatrics or dramatic reveals. Just gave him a simple nod. He leaned back against the patio railing like someone had physically kicked all the wind out of his lungs. "My God," he muttered under his breath. "You're the one who outbid us on the Port Archer contract, aren't you? The federal logistics and warehousing deal." He looked up at me, searching my face for confirmation. "We spent 8 full months chasing that contract. 8 months of proposals and meetings and negotiations, and you just came in and sealed it." His voice cracked a little at the end, like he didn't want to believe the answer he already knew was coming. I kept my tone completely flat and matter of fact. "Closed last Tuesday." His mouth literally hung open. I could see him doing the mental math in his head, watching the dominoes fall behind his eyes as he realized what this actually meant. His firm had been relying heavily on that specific contract to maintain their entire East Coast footprint. This wasn't just about money or one deal. This was their main artery. Without it, they'd bleed out slowly. More laughter suddenly burst out from inside the house. Her brother had probably made another clever jab about my executive-sounding title. I heard someone shout loud enough for us to hear on the patio, "I bet he printed those cards at Staples." Robert didn't laugh at all. He was actually sweating now, despite the cold air. "Does David know about this?" he asked, meaning her father. "Not yet," I said simply. Robert exhaled hard and pinched the bridge of his nose. Damn it. You realize this affects half our entire storage pipeline, right? You've effectively boxed us into subleasing on our own distribution routes." Then he paused and looked at me with something like disbelief. "And David's still in there mocking you like you're somebody's personal assistant." I just shrugged. People see exactly what they want to see, Robert. Nothing more, nothing less. He stared at me for a long second. "You're not going to tell them tonight, are you?" I asked him a simple question back. Would it change anything if I did? His jaw tightened visibly. It would humiliate them. Completely humiliate all of them. I took the business card back from his hand and slipped it into my wallet. They've had that opportunity all night long. This is their choice. I didn't wait around for his reply, just stepped back into the house. The lights, the noise, all those smug voices and fake laughter, they all seemed so completely removed from reality now. So disconnected from the man Robert had just realized he'd been sitting across from at dinner. I said my polite goodbyes to everyone, kissed Sarah on the cheek like nothing had happened. She barely even looked up from whatever shallow conversation her cousins were still circling around like vultures. "Going somewhere?" she asked, distracted and not really caring. "Yeah," I said calmly. "Got an early call tomorrow morning." She made a joke with that same mocking tone she'd been using all evening. "More of your little empire to run?" I just smiled and nodded. Something like that. And then I left. The truth is, I hadn't even planned on bringing those business cards to dinner. They weren't for them or their approval. I'd printed a fresh set earlier that week because my old title had become outdated. The ink was literally still drying when I slid them into my coat pocket before we left. What they didn't know, what they wouldn't find out until much later, was that Titan Equity had finalized 3 major acquisitions that exact same week. Not just the federal contract they were freaking out about, but 3 crucial feeder companies that supplied warehousing services, technology platforms, security systems, logistics coordination, and yes, even packaging materials. All routes and services that her family's firm depended on to function. They weren't just about to learn who I really was. They were about to discover exactly what I owned. And it wouldn't come in some flashy headline or press conference. It would show up quietly on the balance sheet. Quiet, brutal, and absolutely final. By Monday morning, the whispers had transformed into frantic phone calls, and Sarah's phone would not stop buzzing. She sat at our kitchen island, with her coffee getting cold and untouched, scrolling frantically through group chats that had gone from mocking me, complete panic mode. One cousin sent a news link. Another sent a screenshot of something. Then finally, the call came from Melissa, the family's self-appointed gatekeeper of all business gossip. Melissa worked in procurement at Ridgemont Group, one of the mid-tier vendors that serviced the family's entire logistics chain. "Hey," Melissa said, completely breathless. No hello, no pleasantries, just straight panic. "Tell me this isn't true. Your husband, did he actually take over Norwood Supply?" Sarah laughed hard, still not getting it. "What? No, he's still running that little startup of his. Something with packaging subscriptions, I think." Melissa didn't laugh back, not even a little. "No, you don't get it at all. Norwood is gone, completely absorbed, folded into something called Titan, effective last Thursday. The emails are already bouncing back. Every single contact we had there is redirecting." Sarah blinked, trying to process. "Wait, what? Are you serious right now?" Melissa's voice got higher. "I work with them directly, Sarah. Half our entire Q1 inventory was supposed to come through Norwood, and now all the new contact emails are redirecting to Titan domains. Did you know anything about this?" Sarah stared at her own reflection in the microwave door. "No," she said slowly. "I didn't know." Melissa just hung up. No goodbye, no explanation, just click. Sarah set her phone down on the counter. The silence in our house felt too clean, too perfectly balanced, like everything was about to tip over and shatter. She got up and walked slowly to my home office. The door wasn't locked because it never was. I'd never needed locks to keep her out. My laptop was still open on the desk where I'd left it. She hesitated for just a second, then moved quickly, driven by this need to know the truth. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. Maybe just some small piece of evidence she could laugh at and dismiss. Maybe something that would confirm this whole Titan thing was just a weird coincidence. A name overlap. Some shell company with a borrowed logo that had nothing to do with me. Instead, she found a folder on my desktop titled Q1 Confirmed Contracts. Inside was a detailed spreadsheet listing over 40 different companies. Norwood Supply was there. So was Castor Logistics and Turnfleet Distribution. There were email chains from my work address at titanholdings.com, an internal memo welcoming 6 new logistics coordinators to Titan's Atlanta division. All names she recognized immediately from her father's vendor network. Names she'd heard at 1,000 family dinners. Her throat went completely dry. Then she heard the quiet sound of the shower turning off upstairs. I was done. She slammed the laptop closed and backed out of the office like she'd just stepped on broken glass. I walked downstairs a few minutes later with a towel around my waist, hair still damp, calm as ever like it was any normal morning. She'd made it back to the kitchen island, eyes fixed on the marble countertop, not moving. I wasn't even remotely surprised to see her sitting there like that. "You went through my files?" I asked, my voice low and even. She didn't speak. Didn't need to, really. The laptop was still sitting there on the desk behind her, practically breathing with all the secrets she'd just uncovered. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, added no sugar like always, and took a sip. Then, casually, without any malice or triumph in my voice, I said, "Next time you throw something out, maybe check what's printed on it first." I looked directly at her when I said it. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. There was absolutely nothing she could say that wouldn't just dig the hole deeper. Because in that exact moment, it hit her like a freight train. This wasn't about one lucky deal, or some fluke where I accidentally ended up on the winning side of a contract bid. This was an entire network. And not the kind her family played tennis with at the country club. No, this was a carefully constructed lattice of strategic acquisitions, legal bridge companies, shell entities that had real teeth and real power. It had reach, coordination, multiple layers of protection and control. She'd thought I'd been harmlessly tinkering in the background the whole time we'd been married, playing entrepreneur with safe money from some inheritance, a hobby to keep me occupied. But she'd been completely wrong. Dead wrong. The man she'd openly mocked at Thanksgiving dinner for printing his own business cards had just folded 3 of her family's legacy vendors into a firm she couldn't even pronounce correctly. And he'd done it 2 days ago while she was laughing at him. She suddenly remembered something else from Thanksgiving dinner. When Robert asked if the card was real, when the entire room went cold and silent, she had laughed, tried to brush it off like it was nothing. But Robert hadn't laughed, and neither would her father once he finally saw what was already unraveling. Because this wasn't about pride anymore. It was about control. And she'd just realized in horror how little control her family actually had left. It was almost midnight when I heard it. The house was dark and quiet, except for the sound of ice clinking in a glass and the low murmur of David's voice echoing through the hallway downstairs. Sarah had come down for water but stopped cold when she heard him in the kitchen. The tone wasn't his usual booming confidence that filled every room he entered. It was something much tighter, clipped, like he was physically trying not to lose his grip on reality. She stepped softly, barefoot on the hardwood floor, and stopped just short of the kitchen doorway. He hadn't noticed her yet. His back was to the hallway, hunched over the island counter, one hand gripping his phone, the other hand rubbing his temple like thinking was causing him physical pain. No, Robert confirmed it personally, he was saying into the phone. The bid's completely gone. They secured the entire contract under some umbrella group called Titan Equity. A pause while the other person responded. No, not public at all. Quiet as hell. That's what makes this so goddamn frustrating. No board announcements, no press releases, nothing. Everyone thought Norwood would roll into Q1 as the primary supplier, like always. Now we're completely scrambling to find alternatives. Sarah's heart stuttered in her chest. Titan Equity. That was the exact name printed on my business card. She stepped carefully into the kitchen. Dad? He spun around, startled. His face was flushed, but not from drinking. This was pure stress. What are you doing up? He asked quickly, muting the phone. I heard you say Titan Equity, she said quietly. His expression shifted instantly to defensive and annoyed. Yes, so what? She swallowed hard. That's the company name on Jason's business card. From Thanksgiving. For a single beat, he just stared at her, like he couldn't process the sentence he'd just heard. Then realization hit him fast and hard like a physical blow. Your husband is tied to Titan? She didn't answer, not really. Her silence said absolutely everything he needed to know. He let out this bitter, broken laugh and shook his head, muttering into the empty air. Jesus Christ. No wonder Robert looked like he'd seen a ghost at dinner. She moved toward the counter slowly, her voice getting quieter. You're saying his company actually beat yours? It wasn't even a fight, he snapped back at her. They came in completely under the radar, swept the entire contract, bundled logistics with security and fleet management, everything in one package. It's not just this one deal, Sarah. We're completely exposed now. Robert says they've already got control of at least 4 different feeder companies. I don't even know what the hell we're still attached to anymore, or what we actually own. The raw panic in his voice cracked something deep inside her. She'd grown up believing her father was completely unshakable, invincible. He'd once told a state senator to get in line and wait his turn. Now he looked like a man who'd just realized the line had moved and he wasn't anywhere near it anymore. He never talked about any of this, she said, half to herself. Never once mentioned Titan to me. I honestly thought he was still dealing with that little subscription box business, the packaging thing. Her father let out a harsh snort. That was probably just a decoy, something to keep people looking in the wrong direction. Did you ever actually ask him what he was doing on his laptop all those hours? She nodded slowly. I checked it Friday morning after Melissa called. I found all the contracts, Norwood, Turnfleet, Castor Logistics. There's way more than just those 3. Way more. Her father exhaled heavily and leaned his full weight on the island counter. So he's not just involved in Titan. He is Titan. He's running the whole operation. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. All she could think about was the Thanksgiving dinner, the laughter echoing through the dining room, the mocking comments, the casual cruelty, the way she'd tossed his business cards into the trash like they were literal garbage, the way she'd dismissed him completely in front of her entire family, made him look small and pathetic. And now, just days later, the company name printed on those cards was systematically gutting her family's business influence from the inside out, and she'd personally invited it in. She'd married it. She felt her face flush with something much deeper than simple embarrassment. This wasn't just about her marriage falling apart. This was about everything she'd taken for granted her entire life. Power, status, control, respect, and how she'd completely failed to see the quiet storm building in the man who slept next to her every single night. Don't tell anyone else yet, her father said, starting to pace the kitchen now. We need to understand exactly how deep this goes before we make it any worse than it already is. But it was already worse. So much worse. She could feel it in her bones, in the air, in the way her father's hands were shaking. Titan wasn't just some lucky upstart company with good timing. It was a calculated machine, built carefully piece by the man she'd been belittling for years. He didn't wear expensive tailored suits to impress people. He didn't chase headlines or magazine covers. He chased leverage. Real, quiet, unmovable leverage. And now, with every vendor that slipped away, every contract that vanished into thin air, her father's empire was bleeding out slowly, and her husband was the one holding the scalpel, making precise cuts. Her phone rang just after sunrise the next morning, Robert's name on the screen. She stared at it for a second before answering. The last time they'd spoken, his voice had been cracked with panic. This time it was different, more controlled but somehow heavier, like someone who'd finally mapped out a massive fire and realized it was already way too late to stop it from spreading. Sarah, he said without any greeting, this isn't just about Norwood Supply. I've been digging deeper into this, researching. She stayed completely quiet, coffee cup in hand, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile. He's been systematically buying up feeder companies, Robert continued, his voice tight. All small regional operations, logistics, packaging, fleet services, distribution networks, routing software. Some of them were literally hanging on by a thread financially. He didn't just outbid us on contracts, Sarah. He saved these struggling companies, rebranded them under new names, folded them all under Titan Holdings, and nobody in the industry even noticed it was happening until it was already done. She pressed the speaker button and set the phone down on the counter, needing both hands to steady her coffee mug. You're absolutely sure it's him doing this? Robert's voice got harder. I traced director filings going back 18 months. It's all done indirectly through LLCs and shell companies. But Sarah, your husband's fingerprints are on absolutely everything. His name doesn't always show up on the public documents. But the LLC registration patterns, the board reshuffles, the redirect chains, it's all him. The entire structure is completely deliberate. The silence was intentional from the start. She forced out a laugh, but it came out brittle and fake. He's not that strategic. He can't be. Robert actually snapped at her. You said that exact same thing last week, and now half your father's vendors have completely changed their email domains. Silence hung between them. He never bragged about any of this, she said quietly, mostly to herself, trying to understand. Not even once. No. Robert agreed, because bragging gets you seen and noticed. He didn't want to be seen. He wanted to own. There's a huge difference. She reached for my laptop again, opened the same spreadsheet she hadn't dared to look at since Friday. It was still there, the acquisition roadmap laid out in perfect detail. Only now it actually made sense. Every single company had a specific function in the larger system. One handled dry goods storage, another managed climate-controlled fleet dispatching, one dealt with regulatory compliance. Another ran AI-powered routing software for final mile delivery optimization. She clicked open the integration tab at the bottom of the spreadsheet. There it was in bold text, Q3 forecast, complete systems integration, supply chain ownership, projected margin control, 72%. She stared at that number until her eyes hurt. 72%. He didn't just build a business, he built total control. Not loud, not flashy, but absolutely ironclad and impossible to break. And the worst part? It had all happened directly under their noses while they laughed. While they made jokes about his hobby and his little startup dreams, he'd been quietly weaving vines through the entire foundation of their regional operation. Not owning a single piece outright where it could be seen, but having every single piece tied directly to him through contracts and dependencies. He's not just a vendor now, Robert said, his voice almost a whisper. He's the spine, the central nervous system. Remove him and half of our operations cease to function immediately. Sarah gripped the edge of the table hard enough that her knuckles turned white. Her father had built his empire on handshakes, golf games, and ego. He'd never anticipated someone like me. Someone who didn't want the spotlight or care about being invited to the club. Someone who didn't need praise at dinner parties or validation from the country club set. She remembered her own words from Thanksgiving with perfect, painful clarity. Nobody cares about these cards. God, the irony was crushing. I didn't need anyone to care. Because while they were busy building image and reputation, I was building infrastructure. Real, tangible, unmovable infrastructure. I need to talk to him, she muttered, standing up suddenly. Robert exhaled hard on the other end. Don't threaten him. Don't poke at this. He's holding the entire system in balance right now. The minute he feels any pressure or senses you're pushing back, he could let it all collapse on purpose. And then we're all completely screwed. Your father's company, my retirement, and everything. The line went dead. She stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding in her ears. The walls of our house felt different now, like they weren't really hers, like they were made of borrowed brick and paper confidence that could blow away any second. And at the center of it all was a man she'd thought she completely understood, the man who sat silent at family dinners year after year, who let all the insults roll off his back, who picked up the tab and said nothing when her father made jokes about startup toys and hustle hobbies. That man had quietly threaded their entire world together, like vines slowly choking a stone mansion. And now, if he decided to pull even slightly, the whole house would groan, then crack, then fall completely apart. The boardroom had never been this silent for this long. Normally it buzzed with constant posturing, interruptions, dry corporate jokes, the occasional ego-driven monologue about quarterly dominance and market share. But today there were no spreadsheets on the polished table, no slides on the screen, just paper folders, closed laptops, and the heavy stench of panic badly masked by expensive cologne. Her father, David, stood at the head of the long walnut conference table, sleeves rolled up, jaw set like concrete. The veins in his hands bulged visibly every single time he gripped the armrest of his leather chair. Sarah sat 2 seats down from him, arms crossed defensively, eyes flicking between directors who would no longer make eye contact with her. Everything is compromised, David said flatly. Norwood's not ours anymore. Castor's not renewing any contracts. Turnfleet redirected their entire route planning operation to tighten infrastructure as of last Thursday. One director asked nervously, "Can we cancel these contracts somehow?" David snapped back immediately. "We already tried. There are no cancellation clauses in any of them. Every single agreement is watertight, ironclad, executed with legal precision." A younger board member, at the far end of the table, raised his hand tentatively like he was in school. "Do we even know who Titan actually is? There's no organizational chart anywhere, no press releases, no CEO profile on LinkedIn or anywhere else." Sarah didn't speak, couldn't speak. Her father didn't look at her. He glared with pure anger. But it was Sarah's mother who finally said it out loud, quiet and cutting like a knife. "You told us he was harmless. You said he was no threat." The sentence hung in the room like a smoke alarm that nobody could reach to turn off. Sarah felt her skin crawl. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, spreading down her neck. Her throat was completely dry. She wanted desperately to say something, anything at all, to shift some of the weight off her shoulders. But what could she possibly say? That the man she married and mocked had just outplayed every single executive in this room? That he'd been laying careful groundwork while she rolled her eyes at his business chats? That she had laughed, actually laughed out loud, as she threw away the business cards that were now the only thing standing between their family and complete logistical collapse? Her silence was her only answer. One of the senior advisors, a man who'd been a close friend of the family for decades, finally leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I told you years ago that arrogance blinds people more than failure ever could." Nobody corrected him or argued. David opened a thick folder in front of him. Inside were copies of all the supplier agreements they had signed over the past year. They'd looked completely routine at the time. Favorable terms, slightly aggressive scheduling clauses, but nothing that had stood out as unusual or dangerous. Except now, looking back, every single one of those contracts had been carefully drafted by Titan subsidiaries that were operating under completely different names at the time of signing. Smart, silent, strategic. And I had personally orchestrated the entire thing from beginning to end. I didn't need a seat at this conference table. I owned the floor underneath it. I owned the building. "We're completely entangled," another executive muttered, rubbing his face. "And if we try to untangle ourselves now, We lose critical supply for at least 6 months, maybe longer. That's half our entire distribution cycle. It would tank Q1 completely. Someone else whispered, tanking Q1 might actually be our best possible outcome at this point. David stood up again, both palms flat on the table. We regroup. We double back on existing contracts. We find legal foothold somewhere, leverage, something we can use. Sarah's mother asked the question everyone was thinking. Have you talked to him directly yet, face to face? David didn't answer her. Sarah finally spoke up. Her voice was quiet but perfectly clear. He won't come to the table to negotiate. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. He already set the table, she continued slowly. We just didn't realize we'd been eating off it this whole time. The silence that followed wasn't just tension anymore. It was acceptance. Cold, brutal acceptance. They had treated me like a footnote in their story, like a harmless bystander to their empire. And now the bystander had completely rewired the entire grid while they weren't paying attention. Sarah looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring caught the light from the window. She'd worn it like a badge of normalcy, of control over her life. But it wasn't that anymore. It was a reminder, not of love or partnership, but of who she should have known, and who now knew absolutely everything about her world while saying nothing at all. Saturday morning brought the storm. The front page of the Business Tribune landed with a quiet thunk on driveways across 5 states. Some readers ignored it completely. Some skimmed it quickly. But by noon, it was forwarded to every email inbox that mattered in the industry. From invisible to inevitable. How Titan quietly captured the East Coast supply chain, read the headline. The image wasn't some glossy CEO portrait. No smiling executive in a blazer leaning against a warehouse door. It was a simple photo of a business card. Matte black, minimal text, embossed lettering. Jason Parker, executive partner, Titan Equity Holdings. The exact same card Sarah had thrown in the garbage can at Thanksgiving. The one that had made her laugh so hard. Now it was the symbol of what every boardroom across the region was frantically whispering about. Sarah stared at it on her tablet screen, completely frozen at the breakfast bar. She clicked into the full article with trembling hands. It was methodical, almost surgical in its analysis. A detailed timeline of silent acquisitions, smart contracts, anonymous shell LLCs, logistics integration, packaging consolidation, supply chain redundancies, all consolidated under Titan Equity in under 18 months. The journalist called it the quiet surge and quoted multiple industry experts. Whoever's behind Titan isn't just a brilliant business mind, one CEO said. They're a ghost in the system. They made absolutely sure no one saw them coming until they were the only option left. Another executive added, a masterclass in being underestimated. He played the fool just long enough for everyone to dismiss him. Then he rewrote all the rules while nobody was watching. Sarah felt like the floor underneath her had just cracked open. That last quote especially. It wasn't just industry analysis. It was a mirror held up to her face. Her phone absolutely exploded. First, it was a Kelsey from her old internship group. Wait, is this your Jason? Like your actual husband? Then her yoga instructor. Hold on, isn't this your husband? You told me he was in packaging or boxes or something? And then her investment club's group chat went completely insane. Amanda, that's your last name, right? Parker? Holy hell, you're married to this guy? Why didn't you ever say anything? She didn't reply to any of them. She couldn't. The worst message came 5 minutes later from a partner at a fund she'd been trying to charm into a joint real estate project for over a year. Hey, if your husband's ever looking for minority equity partners in future ventures, definitely loop me in. Hell of a strategy he's running. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She remembered mocking me about the empire I'd mentioned building. All those dinners where she'd cut me off mid-sentence to talk about her own deal flow and networking wins. The way she'd openly corrected me in front of her parents when I brought up distribution bottlenecks, as if I was some amateur who didn't understand business. Now the entire industry was quoting my playbook, and she was getting tagged in LinkedIn comments like she was just my plus one, like she was an accessory. He came home just after 8 that evening. No grand entrance, no announcement, Just the quiet click of the front door and the soft thud of shoes coming off in the entryway. Sarah had been waiting on the couch for over an hour, mentally rehearsing apologies that wouldn't sound like pathetic groveling. Seeing me walk in, composed and completely unreadable, she knew instantly that nothing she'd practiced would work. I looked at her the way someone might look at a hotel they used to frequent. Familiar, but not sentimental. No emotion at all. "I didn't know," she whispered. I nodded once, like she'd finally caught up to a truth I'd been living with for years. "I didn't know what you were building, what any of it meant. Jason, I didn't see it." I said quietly. "You didn't want to see it." No anger in my voice, just simple fact. She stepped forward carefully. "But we can still work on this together." I pulled back before she could reach for my hand. Not harsh or cruel, more like a door that had always been locked. She'd just never bothered to check if it would open. "No," I said softly, "absolutely final." Then, without any ceremony, I set a folder on the coffee table. Standard manila envelope, no branding, no weight, except the weight of what it meant. She stared at it for a second before sitting down slowly and opening it with shaking hands. Inside was a single legal packet. Separation papers. Clean, uncontested, already drawn up. No alimony demands, no property battles, everything divided clearly. She realized with growing horror that this had probably been drafted before the article even dropped. Maybe even before Thanksgiving dinner. At the bottom of the final page was one handwritten line in my writing. Just one sentence. "You threw the card. I kept the empire." Her throat tightened painfully. "This isn't you," she said, voice trembling. "You're not like this. You never wanted any of this." I cut her off. "I wanted a partnership. You wanted a performance. There's a difference." She shook her head desperately. I was wrong about everything. I tilted my head slightly. "You were loud about it, though." That stung more than she'd expected. I sat down across from her, but I felt miles away. Not just across a coffee table, but across a canyon. "I never asked to be worshipped or praised," I said calmly. "I just asked to be respected as an equal," she said. "But you were always so quiet about everything you were doing," I replied, matter of fact. "Because you weren't listening. You didn't ask what I was building. You asked when I'd be done playing entrepreneur. You called my meetings pretend work. You told your friends I was on my third maybe company and probably wouldn't make it." Complete silence fell between us. She looked down at the folder again. No fight, no drawn-out legal bloodbath, just a surgical extraction, clean and final. And underneath it all, the bitter truth she was finally understanding. I wasn't doing this to her as revenge. I was just completely done doing anything for her. "You really won't even consider talking about fixing this?" she asked, eyes wet. I stood up. I did talk about it. For 7 years straight. She watched me walk toward the hallway, the same hallway I used to disappear down after every tense family dinner, after she rolled her eyes at my plans and dreams. She used to think I was just retreating like a wounded animal, pouting. Now she finally understood. I had been building the entire time, and the distance she felt now wasn't new at all. It had always been there between us. She'd just never bothered to notice it until she reached for a hand that was no longer waiting to be held. The dining room felt bigger this year at Thanksgiving, though nothing physical had actually changed. Same heavy oak table, same chandelier that was too bright, same floral centerpiece her mother commissioned like clockwork. But the energy was completely gone. Sarah sat with her elbows tucked in tight, chewing dry turkey that tasted like cardboard dipped in guilt. The family still showed up, though fewer than before. Some had quietly stopped calling after the headlines. Others stepped back once it became clear her father's grip on the business was slipping badly. No one openly blamed Sarah for what happened. They didn't have to. It was written on every face, hanging in every silence. Her father looked older, thinner, worn down. He'd been forced to sell off a third of the company in Q2, called it strategic divestment at the time. Everyone knew it wasn't strategic at all. Uncle Robert had retired early under health reasons, but Sarah had seen the real resignation letter. He'd never recovered from the fallout. The company wasn't dead. Not technically, it just wasn't theirs anymore. The laughter at the table was softer now, more cautious. No bold toast to success. No one jabbed at anyone's job or clothes or marriage, and it was like they'd all been forced to taste humility and didn't quite know how to swallow it. Her cousin Jamie leaned in quietly. Is he coming this year? Sarah just gave a small shake of her head, eyes never leaving her plate. Jamie nodded and didn't push. I figured he wouldn't. No one said my name anymore at these dinners. Not her father, not her mother, not the cousins who used to snicker about my pretend CEO routine. I had become the ghost that haunted every quarterly report, every supplier negotiation, every hollow phone call with the legal team, trying desperately to claw back leverage they'd never truly owned. Across town that same evening in a converted brick warehouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, I hosted a very different kind of Thanksgiving dinner. No assigned seats, no family politics, just my team. Logistics leads, equity partners, legal architects, technology heads. The people who'd helped me quietly build what others had mocked and dismissed. The table was smaller, warmer, more real. Between the turkey and good bourbon, I passed out updated business cards to everyone. They were even simpler now. Just my name, the company name, and a phrase at the bottom. We don't explain. We execute. My team laughed and understood immediately. Some of them had been underestimated in their own circles too. Dismissed, mocked, told they'd never make it. That's exactly why they'd followed me. Back at the estate, Sarah excused herself before dessert, claimed she had a headache. Truthfully, she just couldn't take the echo of her own voice from last year still ringing in her skull. Who even reads business cards anymore? She did now, every single day. She thought about my new team, the new table, the network that had replaced her family's influence. She used to sit right next to the man who built all of it. Now she was just a cautionary tale, a name that didn't make the invite list anymore. The man they'd all mocked hadn't just succeeded, he'd made them completely irrelevant. And this time, Sarah didn't laugh at all. She just lowered her head and finally truly understood.